My message is called The View from the Mountaintop. You've probably had that experience, maybe climbing somewhere, where as you're climbing, as you're going upward, you're kind of just focused on your feet and the ground, looking where the rocks are, the roots, or the uneven place, so that you don't fall. And then as you get to a place to stop, you look back at where you've come, and you see a totally different perspective from when you started. When you start, all you can see is just kind of what's right around you. But as you climb up the mountain, your perspective widens and you can see further and further. Well, this is very true in a spiritual sense as well. As we widen our perspective, as we open our eyes to see reality as it really is, we see more and more than what we thought was all there was. We rise. That's what we're about, is going to a higher level, higher place in consciousness so that we can see further, imagine more, see a wider possibility of what's available for us. So, if you're listening to this and you don't see this cartoon shows a holy man sitting cross-legged at the top of a mountain and a hiker climbing up with a backpack and his climbing pick. And the sign in front of the guru says, "Out of order." Have you ever felt like that? Like you're working, you're trying, you're doing your meditation, your treatment, you're reading, you're taking classes, and you finally feel like you're getting somewhere, and then you get that answer. Sorry, out of order. Now, what does this cartoon really mean? Of course, what it means, and what I want you to remember, is that there isn't any place to get. So we're talking about the view from the mountaintop, but remember, that's metaphorical. That's a wider view, an expansive view, and opening our eyes to see what we haven't seen before. It doesn't mean that we need to get somewhere where we're not. So sometimes when we think about being on the mountaintop, or what it means to reach the mountaintop so that we can have the view from the mountaintop, we may use words like enlightenment or illumination. Jesus called that the kingdom of God, that place where we experienced reality, the love, the connection, where we saw that, where that was real for us. So here's a story that I like. It's a story about a monk who had lived many years in a monastery, studying, meditating, being taught by the master, being open and listening. And one day, this monk came to his master, his Roshi, his teacher, and he said, "Great one, I have been preparing, and I feel now that I am ready to go up into the mountain and find a place like the Buddha did when he said, I'm going to find a place and I'm going to wait there until that sense of knowing comes. Am I ready?" And the master said, "Yes, my son. You've studied, you have prepared, and you are ready. You are ready to experience enlightenment." So the monk started off on his way, traveling, walking, looking for the perfect place where he could sit and allow that experience to fill him, that experience he'd been taught to call enlightenment, the light coming in, the seeing, the knowing what's real. As he was walking, he passed an old man coming the other way, carrying a heavy burden. It wasn't clear what was in his burden, maybe food or supplies, fuel. Maybe this man was off somewhere to start a new life. And the old man stepped aside so that the monk could go past him. And the monk passed him without speaking. But after he'd only taken a few more steps, suddenly he turned around and he said to the old man, "Old man, tell me, how does one experience enlightenment?" The old man carefully set his burden down on the ground and looked around for a place perhaps to sit down, to share his wisdom. But in that instant, the monk experienced it. That sort of indescribable connection with the infinite, that knowing, the perfection, the wonder, the miracle of being alive. He was filled with just such an amazing joy, such a lightness, such a sense of freedom that he could just hardly be with it. And he just let it soak into him, feeling like dancing, like singing, like he could fly. He got it. Oh, that's the secret. Let our burdens go. Set down all that heaviness we're carrying, all those old beliefs, those fears, that guilt, all the pressure, the thinking we need to do something more, the thinking we're not good enough. That's it. Just let it down. As easy as this old man set down his burden. So the monk paused for a minute, just celebrating. And then he turned his steps and began along the path again. Again, he hadn't gone far when he found himself turning around and saying to the old man, "Old man, now what? What do you do after enlightenment?" And again, of course, the old man didn't speak a word. He stood up. He lifted his burden and began his way down the mountainside. So as we talk about the view from the mountaintop, let's remember that. What do we need to let go of? What do we need to leave behind? And what do we need to take up? What challenges? What new experiences? What growth opportunities? That's what the monk learned. Now, as we're all on this path, this trek, this spiritual journey, we're in many different places. You know, some of us are just starting out. In fact, some of us may be just kind of realizing there is a path and that it is a journey and that there's something else besides striving, struggling, surviving, that we don't have to follow the beliefs of our culture, what our parents taught us as to what's important and what we should do and how we should be and how we should act. That's an exciting place to be. Buddhists like to call that beginner's mind, where everything's kind of new. And some of us, some of you, may have been on this path for a while. You know that there's more to life than appearances, than struggles. And you know and accept that your divinity and form, that infinite spirit flows through you and expresses through you. You know that, and yet sometimes you just get feeling resigned. It feels too hard. It feels like you've tried for so long and nothing's happened. Maybe you feel like you want to give up. I know I've been in that place where sometimes I look around me at the world and what's going on, the wars, the violence, the ravages to our planet, how people treat each other, the fear, the anger, and I feel overwhelmed with it. So maybe some of you are in that place. And then there may be some of you who are in this place where your life is actually working perfectly. You're comfortable. You know who you are. And that's a great place to be too. Now, whichever of those places you're in, I invite you to think about how life might look different from the mountaintop. If you're just starting out on the path, it's a brand new thing to think about. What's available? If you're in that feeling of being weary, being a little overwhelmed, how might a new view of life refresh you, renew you, open you up again? And if you're in that place where you're pretty comfortable, I've got this figured out. I've created a good life for myself. I have what I need. How could you stretch yourself? What else is possible? Sometimes we call that your cutting edge. I know sometimes I'm there. I get feeling too comfortable, and I have to say to myself, wow, what if I stretched myself beyond this place of being comfortable? What else might be possible? Sometimes when we take on something huge, something incredible, it's not comfortable anymore. It's hard. We come up against challenges. It's like taking a hike up the mountain and you fall and it's rocky. But there's something else to be gained than if you just stay in your same comfortable place. So, how do we get there? Like, how do we get to the mountaintop? How do we see that view from the mountaintop? Of course, many of our great spiritual teachers through the ages have talked about that. They're aware that there's something else available, and they've given us instruction. Sometimes it's what they themselves did, the process they went through, and it's an invitation. Come try what I tried. Sometimes it's things that they believe will make a difference that they've observed in the world around them. So I want to share a couple of practices, ideas. If you're in that place and you say, I want to see the view from the mountaintop. But how? How do I get there? So I'm going to tell you a true story of one young woman who gives us an example of how to get there regardless of what happens to you, what you've experienced. And this happened in, I believe, 2002. And it happened in Salt Lake, where I was living at the time. And it involved a young woman named Elizabeth Smart. She was 14. She had just graduated, just getting ready to graduate from middle school. And one night, a homeless person that her family had hired to do some work at the home broke into the home and kidnapped her, while her terrified 9-year-old sister that she shared a bedroom with pretended to be asleep. This man held her at knife point, took her up into a camp in the mountains where he was living with his wife. And there they chained her to a tree. She was starved. She was raped, sometimes multiple times a day. This man was delusionally believed that he was supposed to find virgins and make them his wives. The story, of course, made nationwide news. There were searches, there were law enforcement searches, volunteer searches, dogs, searching, with no results. And of course, after a time, as these things do, it wasn't in the news as much. Her family continued their efforts. And 9 months passed. And I think many of us, and myself included, thought it was likely she was dead. You know, with a child that's kidnapped, the longer it goes, the more likely it is that child is no longer alive. I personally remember the day. It's one of those things where you remember where you were and who told you. I was at work. One of my coworkers came running into the rooms. They found Elizabeth Smart. She's alive. So Elizabeth finished school, graduated from college, got married, and became an advocate for abused children, promoting searches and the things like the Amber Alert. And she was interviewed a number of times, and people said to her, you know, you don't really seem to hold any anger about this. And she said this, she said, forgiveness is not necessarily a two-way street. What she meant by that is her feelings about what happened were hers. She wasn't waiting for anyone else to ask her for forgiveness, nor is it necessarily the banishing of anger. Forgiveness is allowing myself to feel whatever emotions I feel and to deal with them. She did not let this experience define her. She refused to be a victim in that. I want to share with you a little bit from an interview she gave before her second book was published. She'd written a book about the ordeal and thought that was all, but so many people had questions for her about how did you do that? How did you maintain your sense of who you were and not let your circumstances and your experiences define you? And so she wrote her second book. And this is what she said in that interview.
And I remember leading up to the trial, I was actually very nervous to see my captors again. I hadn't seen them in person since the day I was rescued, and I didn't know how I was going to react. I remember sitting in the front row behind the prosecuting team, and they brought Brian Mitchell into the room, and he still had his long beard and his long hair, but he was shackled with his hands around his waist and his feet, and there were 2 guards on either side of him escorting him into the courtroom. And I realized in that moment that I had followed my mom's advice, that I didn't need to be scared of what he would make me feel, because I realized that he had no power over me anymore. And I realized that forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for yourself. At least in my case. I guess I can't speak for anyone else. I can only share what I've learned. And what I've learned is that forgiveness is for you. Because had I held on to my pain, had I held on to my anger, had I held on to all of the terrible, horrible things that these people did to me, that they almost killed me, that they'd taken away, they abruptly put an end to my childhood. They had done terrible, terrible things to me. I could let go of that. I realized that if I said I forgive you to them, it wouldn't matter to them. They will continue on with their life. Either way, whether I say it or not, they don't care. It will not make a difference to them, but it will make a difference to me. If I hold on to that hate, if I hold on to that anger, that means that a part of my soul will always be angry, will always be in pain, will always feel that negativity into my life.
Can you see what she was seeing from the mountaintop, the view from the mountaintop? I mean, she could have seen so many other views. She could have seen a world where bad things happen to good people, where you can't trust people, where people are going to hurt you. She could have lived in fear, and she could have spent the rest of her life gathering evidence for that. See, there it is again. See, there it is again. But she refused to do that. She refused to be defined by what had happened. She let go. She laid that burden down of anger and pain and those experiences. A burden that would have been so easy to carry, to keep carrying, but she set it down. And then, interestingly, she picked up a burden that she chose, a challenge to make a difference, to be an advocate, to reach out to children who have been abused. What do they need to recover, to be strong, to be resilient, to create their lives, and not let what happened to them define who they are? Her question was, how can I make a difference now, given the experience that I have? I can choose to do that. She chose the challenge that she picked up. So here are some ideas. How do you get to that mountaintop place? Elizabeth Smart gives us a wonderful example of, she didn't say it was all right. She retained her anger, but she let go of its effect on her. She was the one who was going to say what her life was like. So a lot of the view from the mountaintop is a choice. That's what Ernest Holmes has taught us over and over again. Change your thinking, change your life. What are our thoughts? Those are what we remember, that life is good, that we are free, that we have the power to choose. We can choose to be awake and aware and to notice. We can accept what's happened without letting it define us, without letting it say who we are or who we're going to be. And above all, as we're making this trek to the mountaintop so that we can see that expansive view that I like to call reality, our limited view, our view where we're nothing, where we're wrong, where other people are trying to hurt us or take advantage of us. That's not reality. As we seek that view from the mountaintop, we remember who we really are. You know, however you want to describe that. You're perfect, whole, and complete. You're who you are. You have the gifts that you have. You've had the experiences that you've had. And right now, you have the power. Lay down the burden. Lay down the burden you've been carrying. Choose what you want to take as you move on. Finally, what do we see from the mountaintop? I want to share with you part of CSL's global vision. I'd like to suggest that as you reach that place where you're ready to see with new eyes, you're ready to awaken, this is what we see from the mountaintop. We see humanity awakening to its spiritual magnificence and discovering the creative power of thought. We see a world where all people discover their own personal power and ability to create an individual life that works within a world that works for everyone. We see a world in which we live and grow as one global family that respects and honors the interconnectedness of all life. We envision a world where personal responsibility joins with social conscience in every area of the political, social sectors, providing sustainable structures to further the emerging global consciousness. We see a world where each and every person has enough food, a home, and a sense of belonging. We see a world in which resources are shared, cared for, and grown, and where there is generous and continuous sharing of these resources. We envision a world which has renewed its emphasis on beauty, nature, and love. We envision a worldwide culture in which forgiveness, whether for errors, injustices, or deaths, is the norm. We envision a world that works for everyone and for all of creation. I invite you now to join me on the path to see the view from the mountaintop. Let's take a moment now to go into prayer together. This is what I know. I know that right here and right now, I am fully alive. I am awake. I am aware. I live surrounded by an energy of peace, an energy of possibility. Everywhere I look, I see life expanding, bursting out, and I know that I am part of that infinite creative energy. I know that each person here, likewise, is an expression of the infinite coming into form as you, as me, as each of us. I know that we are beings of power, that as we seek to expand our vision, to open our hearts, to see further than we ever have before, our view expands, and we have the freedom and the power to set down our burdens, our old fears, our old beliefs, our old grudges, our old distorted view, our old beliefs about what's real. We can set it down as easily as one sets down a burden. And I know we are free to take up that burden again if we want, or any challenge. Life goes on. We take care of each other. We serve each other. We pray for each other. We know the truth for each other. And we are joyful in the doing of that. In everything we do, in everything we see, we live in gratitude. We live in freedom, knowing all that happens to us is a gift from the universe for our awakening. We are awakening. We are lifted up. Our view is expanded as we do our part. And now we let this be easily, effortlessly, letting our words flow into the law that takes them, makes them real, because that's what the law does. Knowing this and remembering this, we say together, and so it is.